It's a bit odd that even GB News, which presents itself as an anti-political correctness, free-thinking channel, is engaging in the same propaganda around the weather that the rest of the media does. As you can see from this image they put on their news story recently about a so-called heat wall that's supposed to hit Britain very soon, they're making things seem like it's extremely hot with scorching red. So what are these temperatures going to be? 34 degrees, 35, 37, 40? It's actually only 24 degrees by the end of May. Now I know that the news sensationalizes absolutely everything for the clicks, but I should be honest from the start in saying I'm not a scientist, I don't know the climate modeling. My concerns around the supposed climate crisis are more political. What I mean by this is as you age, you start to note that things that you're told will happen never seem to happen. For instance, when I was very young, I went to a festival in my hometown of Leicester, and it was all about climate change. All the celebrity pop acts of the day were there. And I remember them stating it was a massive concern that the Netherlands and parts of the East Midlands would be submerged in water by around 2007. Now, of course, that never happened, but being young and naive and idealistic, I took on the Al Gore train, the idea that the day after tomorrow was coming in which we'd have mass disasters such as major cities being submerged underwater and no more snow on the mountaintops of Kilimanjaro and so forth. And then after that, we were constantly told about global warming and how incredibly hot Britain would become. However, that hasn't really happened either, which is why they've shifted their tack now to climate change rather than global warming. Now, as I say, I'm not averse to climate change being real. However, I should also admit I don't know what reasons it could be changing for, whether it's natural weather fluctuations or it is man-made emissions. But what does strike me as odd is how we have all these upper middle class snooty types blocking streets and throwing paint over famous paintings and so forth, complaining that Britain isn't doing enough when Britain is responsible for about 1% of global emissions. Henceforth, much of this seems like many of the people involved in that movement have got very meaningless lives. They're almost spoilt in modernity with nothing to do, so they take up a cause that they feel will give them meaning. Second to that, it gives them an opportunity to sneer at average people who are just trying to go to work as lesser than they are, as not moral equals. Of course, if they were really serious about any of this, their efforts would be towards petitioning China and India above all else. China is responsible for over a quarter of the world's emissions, and that's going to only grow. Henceforth, if they're not going to play ball, it's relatively pointless complaining at average people for using a plastic bag when they go shopping. Yet this starts to make a bit more sense when you see people like Greta Thunberg. She's of course been put forward by the globalists as some innocent child. How can you argue with her?
How dare you?
I'm sure she's a sweet girl, but everything about her is scripted and fake. And more recently, we've seen what she's really about. She's ultimately a watermelon. What that means is someone who's green on the outside, but red on the inside. Now, I'm not saying this to be a smarty pants, it's just to prove a point. I lived and worked in London for well over a decade, and I used my bike to get to work, if not public transport, or I just walked. And on top of that, I never went on holiday because I couldn't afford it. I don't know how many people do that, but anyway, I basically had a very, very low carbon footprint, but still found myself being lectured by all the sort of leftists who go on holiday 2 or 3 times a year, drive to work, and so forth. The point I'm making here isn't that I'm any way better than any of these people. I don't really care what they do. The point is that they use their green credentials to lecture other people, no matter their own behaviour. They're simply modelling their moral opinions on the celebrities they see. How many times do we have celebrities lecturing us about climate change, but then jetting off to some fancy function about that said topic in their big jets and fancy cars and so forth? I mean, there was one story of the ever insufferable Bono complaining about climate change one day and then getting someone to jet off back to Ireland from Italy to collect his favourite hat. It seems to me then that the climate issue is simply a red herring that's used by the globalist elites to take people's minds off more pressing issues, such as those of mass immigration, which they'll call you evil if you raise. And for any leftists who stumbled on this video and got this far in and are now thinking, oh my god, this toxic male is now saying that the climate movement has something to do with mass immigration. Well, tell me why Just Stop Oil is spending their time blocking vans, removing migrants, illegal migrants from the country. So ultimately, I just see this as another dimension of the battle between globalism and tradition. The globalists want to have total control across the world. They want to see everyone as one homogeneous mass and be above those people and rule them with their liberal utopian values. Yet those of us on the ground know that that's completely unworkable, and what we simply want is to be left alone in our own nations to pursue our own destinies. It doesn't mean you hate anybody at all. It simply means you're building for a harmonious long-term future. These are just my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.